Tonight, the harrowing global reality of femicide, how it transcends borders and cultures. With one woman killed every 10 minutes, we bring you the story of Olerato Mongale in South Africa, who was lured on what she thought was a first date.
Her face was just beaten. It was very difficult for me to see her like that. Sorry.
I'll speak to the UN, which says the epidemic of violence against women and girls shames humanity. But with gaps in data and accountability, do we even know how big the crisis is? Also ahead. Dozens more Palestinians killed by Israeli airstrikes in Gaza, even as Washington makes a new ceasefire push. The jury begins deliberating in the sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy Combs, weighing charges which could put the hip-hop mogul in prison for life. Plus, the UK and Europe bake under a heat dome. All that and more coming up in the world with me, Anna Botting. Hello, good evening. It is a global crisis taking the lives of women and girls in every country and territory, and it's rising. But the true scale of femicide is without doubt much higher than we know. Despite growing public outcry and awareness, many victims of gender-motivated killings still go uncounted. And still, the numbers we do have are alarming. The UN's most recent data from 2023 shows that an average of 140 women or girls are killed every day by someone in their family. Well, Africa recorded the highest numbers, and tonight we begin in South Africa. And this special report from our correspondent, Yusra El-Bahir.
A search party of 7 set out to find their friend.
So I thought, no man, we're going to find her. There's no way we're not going to find her.
After she went silent on a first date.
It didn't make sense. Where is she? Why is she missing? And we just, every place we went to looked dodgier, and it made me panic. I was very scared.
The panic worsened when they followed Olerato's phone location and found her bag on the side of the road.
It was quite a small bag, like a clutch bag, so it wasn't even thrown. It was actually looked like it had been placed there.
They file a missing persons report and continue their search.
So this is where the pin brought us to this house.
Little did they know, they were less than 100 meters from where Olerato's body had been dumped.
This is where her body was found by somebody who lives in this house, I think. She had just been thrown here. Her top was open with her breasts out. Her legs were looking that way, and her face was just beaten. It was very difficult for me to see her like that. Sorry.
This is how Olerato's loved ones want her to be remembered. Vibrant, happy, and traveling the world. This CCTV footage is the last time she was seen alive, leaving her home in Johannesburg and walking to the car of a man who asked her out on a date. She appears hesitant. He's not alone in the car. Days later, police would find the car with Olerato's blood across the back seat and shoot one of the 2 men who targeted her dead. They're part of a dangerous criminal syndicate that corner young women in malls, lure them out on dates, and rob them. We spoke to one of the survivors of their deadly money-making scheme.
I went through the same traumatic experience 2 days before Olerato's murder. I was threatened at gunpoint and with a knife, saying I should bring my belongings, and if I don't cooperate, give them my cell phone and access to my bank accounts, and they even made me request money from people. If I don't comply with them, they were going to shoot me.
These cases of abduction and murder are sadly familiar. South Africa has one of the highest femicide rates in the world. An average of 15 women are killed a day, many by their intimate partners. According to police statistics, more than 5,500 women were murdered in South Africa last year, an increase of 33.8% compared to the previous year. The United Nations says Africa recorded the largest number of female intimate partner violence in the world. In the midst of growing criticism around inaction, South African police told us they are determined to tackle the growing femicide crisis here.
This is really a serious issue because the numbers cannot be this high, and majority perish in the hands of, like the case of Olerato, where you will think at the age of 30, you need to live your life as a young woman.
How do you think the police handled this case?
I think we glorified them a bit too much. I think her friends were the real heroes in that moment. I mean, 2 police stations that were 10 minutes apart, one finds a body, one has a missing case, don't make a connection for hours. It's not the most reassuring police work. And if the friends hadn't come forward, then how long would it have taken?
Olerato sent her live location to ensure her safety and was still found beaten to death by her captors.
Seeing her body lying like that, with those bruises and blood everywhere, I don't think what I saw will ever go away.
And for Olerato's friends, the legacy of her death is in keeping with how she lived.
She would be proud of the fact that her name represents such a strong story, and her name probably has brought down a syndicate. She really stood for women. She was a girl's girl, and she wanted girls to be safe, wanted women to be protected. Her name has not just, gone in vain, and her death is standing for something, and there will be change that comes with this.
She said she wants to nourish a tree.
A lemon tree stands where Olerato's body has been laid to rest, surrounded by bouquets and already bearing bitter fruit.
I cry a lot when I'm alone, most of the time. It's painful because when you have one child, just one, and she's taken away from you at the age of 30. So I never thought I'll bury my child. It is painful.
Olerato's ruthless murder is difficult for her loved ones and damning for the country. A brutal warning to women here that they are being hunted. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News, Johannesburg.
Well, joining me now is Amakolo Tonyani, the founder and executive director of Gender-Based Violence Monitor South Africa. Welcome to you, and some awful cases there in Yusra's report. One young woman dead, another traumatised by her experience. We talked, though, about this being a syndicated crime gang and organisation. So is this violence about crime, about robbing and stealing from people, or is it about attitudes to women?
Good evening to your listeners, and thank you for having me. Really, I would like to address that question and firstly say that is the daily reality of how women are being killed in South Africa. Over 5,000 that have been reported dead just last year. So a country that is marred with high rates of criminality. But that criminality also extends to targeting women. Very highly organized syndicates that are part of violence against women. But we could have a very long conversation. But yes, it's very contextual. We can have a very nuanced debate. But South Africa is the femicide capital of the world, unfortunately.
Yes, so what then are the drivers of femicide in your view? What are the attitudes towards women at play here?
There is a cocktail of drivers that I would say are behind violence against women, specifically with femicide. We have cultural beliefs, and we do know that in contexts across Africa, Latin America, globally, in fact, culture is a very key driver of violence against women. And the voices and the very strong influences of culture is, one of them being patriarchy, in feminist circles and human rights circles. We have seen how culture about the role of women, where they are supposed to be and where they are not supposed to be, how women should and shouldn't dress, how to avoid dressing provocatively, to avoid being targeted, for instance, rape and femicide. That is culture communicating how women should present themselves to society, a very key driver. Another one is, in South Africa's context, is normalized violence. I referred to how South Africa has a very long history of violence, criminal violence, but where we are now in documenting the data and recording that data is incredibly progressive, because South Africa is a very leading country alongside Kenya in Africa that is collecting data on normalized violence. But we also have a crisis of masculinity. What are the kinds of influences that are informing men's identity and expression of their manhood through violence? So it is a very nuanced conversation to have, but those are the key drivers that we have already identified in the work that we do.
And what about solutions? Are these cases being properly investigated? What action does government need to take? And are young people, young girls being taught about bullying or coercive control, young men being taught about respect? Is any of that happening?
I believe that our South African police services, they are doing a very incredible, quite exceptional job at collecting the data. So we already know, for instance, in 2024, over 5,000 women were reported murdered. We also know that in each quarter, according to the official crime statistics, more than 10,000 women are raped in a particular quarter. So those are the very key areas that the South African police and the South African government is doing in collecting data on, violence that is targeting women. But we need to go further. We need to start looking at what it is that we should be doing in preventing incidents of lethal violence taking place. While we are doing a very good job at collecting the data, that only comes after the fact. So what do we mean when we talk about preventing femicide and the kinds of methods that we should be looking into? It is to really look into coercive control. That is something that you also referred to. That is culture. What are the triggers and the risk factors that we should be looking in terms of social behavior change for men? So there are quite a number of interesting and international best standards that are seen in Brazil, for instance, on documenting coercive control. And in the UK, where there are danger assessments that are done as part of your doctor's assessments, there are a number of international best practices, as I've said. And South Africa just needs to start at looking at what that international practice, the lessons that are coming from that practice, and implementing it at a local level. That's what we mean when you talk about solutions in preventing femicide.
Much work to be done by the sound of it. Amakhulu, much appreciate your time. Thank you so much indeed for joining us there from South Africa. So let's bring in our Africa correspondent, Yusrael Bahir. We heard there that South Africa is the femicide capital of the world, but you've featured the case of one young woman with her future ahead of her, Olerato. How much do you think, often there is one case that's a turning point. How much might this be the case, do you think?
Well, the hope is that this will bring about change. That's what her family and friends hope, that her name can represent something bigger. This shift in consciousness in South Africa, this attention given to an issue that has just become a part of normal life. Young women in South Africa are trained to be hypervigilant. They walk in the streets knowing that their bodies are exposed to targeted crime. Olerato represented those women who take those measures, who send their location to their friends, who make sure that people know where they are at every moment. It's exhausting, frankly, for South African women. But the fact that you do that and you're still killed. The women we spoke to, just women who didn't even know Olerato, said that they felt this could have been me. I do those things. My friends worry about me. There's this idea of a perfect victim, and it's so problematic. But essentially, this shows that when you have someone who has done everything possible to make sure that they're safe, and they are still killed in such a brutal way, then we have a problem. Advocates are a lot more jaded than we'd like. You know, they feel like there are many cases that have come and gone that represent that similar relatability of a young woman who had her life ahead of her, and that there's this outcry and outrage domestically, and then the world moves on, and that there's this impunity. The South African Police Service looked me in the eye and said that they take this extremely seriously, that they're going to do what it takes to make sure that femicide isn't swept under the rug. But the reality is that a lot of people go to these local police stations that are under-resourced, that don't have special units to deal with femicide, and are told to keep it moving. There have been so many missing women since Olerato was killed. There have been, you know, if you look at the average and you multiply it by the days since Olerato was killed at the end of last month, that's around 540 women killed. So this is an escalating issue. It's increased since last year. There needs to be a dedicated national response. Does South Africa have the resources? Does its police service have the resources to do that? That's the question. Activists have been calling on the president and the government to call femicide a national disaster. That would mean that more funds are allocated to local police stations to deal with this. But during COVID, the pandemic was declared a national disaster, and there was a lot of corruption with funds being funneled to other things. So there is that catch-22. As a state, is South Africa going to deal with this head-on, or will more women like Olerato have to die?
Such an important issue to flag. Yusra, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's take a broader picture then, with more of the UN's figures now showing that 85,000 women and girls were killed worldwide in 2023. 60% were at the hands of partners or family members. Put another way, one woman killed every 10 minutes by someone they knew. Here are the stories then of 4 victims in different corners of the world over just 7 months. 22-year-old Mary Ward, whose body was found in Belfast in October. She had told police about being the victim of violent crime weeks before she was killed. Also in October, Senor Khalil and Iqbal Uzunyo were killed by a man they went to school with. Outrage over the 19-year-old women's murder forced the government to promise tougher laws. And last month, 23-year-old Mexican influencer Valeria Marquez was killed during a TikTok live stream. The UN says women in the public eye are at higher risk. Well, let's bring in Calliope Mijero then, chief of the Ending Violence Against Women section at UN Women. You know, awful cases again highlighted there. And on a broader scale, femicide, what are the statistics? And why is this getting such prominent global attention?
Thank you so much. And indeed, the rates of femicide, they are very, very alarming. You mentioned that the global statistics for femicide, they do reveal that one woman or girl is getting killed every 10 minutes. This should be a global emergency, as also the colleagues were saying before about South Africa. And I heard with great interest about the latest victim in South Africa and how the violence and losing her life is really connected with the more generalized violence happening and related to gang violence. We've seen that around the world, that very often arms proliferation, gang violence, they can really increase the risk of women to be exposed to different forms of violence, including intimate partner violence, and to the ultimate, more barbaric form, which is femicide. And I think it would be important there. I would like to bring another angle to the whole discussion, because our latest report in 2024 that we published on statistics on femicide, it reveals that also the home is not safe for women and girls. We know that the majority of femicides, they're happening either at home by their intimate partners or by a member of their families. And I think this is really important because we can see in the place where women and girls, they should feel the safest. You mentioned the streets, you mentioned the harassment and how insecure women feel, but at home. It should be a safe place for them. And that's there where we have the highest rates of femicide.
So is violence itself normalised because of deeper inequalities as part of the power play in relationships, as part of society? And how much impact do you think it has had that, you know, amidst the feeling amongst some men that they've become emasculated, there is a reclaiming of masculinity underway? Role models, influencers with powerful voices have gained big platforms. You know, is that having an impact on how women are treated?
It is indeed, as we have seen, that such violence, it has some root causes. And we cannot only say that if we do certain things, for example, to keep the streets with lights or to have increased police presence, or we cannot definitely shift the burden always on women to be careful where they walk, where they go. And as we hear shaming all the time, the survivors, the victims, about what they were wearing the night they were assaulted, what were they drinking. We really need to check and talk about the institutional, the systemic challenges that we have, which are the root causes of such violence and ultimately femicide. And this is why you mentioned already, and the colleagues before have referred to, the gender stereotypes, the stereotyped gender roles that we see between women and men, boys and girls. All these, they really reinforce the views, the beliefs that the society may have about women and girls, which further normalize such acts of violence, femicide. You refer to a very important trend right now on how this kind of social norms and behaviors, they're really reinforced by social media, by technology platforms, where we see some new trends emerging, the so-called manosphere, for example, where we have groups of men and boys getting together, and they are influenced by some influences that they promise that they will give them some status in their lives, that they would be able to start dating, to have more money, and then they present women and girls as the source of their problems. And we've seen very often that such social norms and behaviors in online spaces, apart from the fact that we can instigate acts of violence in the digital spaces, very often they really become and have linkages with violence happening in offline settings, in real life, that sometimes they even lead to femicide. So definitely the environment we have right now, the speed with which messages are getting circulated, and the crisis that different people in the social media and the digital spaces are taking advantage of, it definitely has a very bad impact and influence for reinforcing norms, stereotypes around women and girls that they can lead to their assault and violence against them.
I'm sure this is an issue to which we will return. But for now, Calliope from UN Women, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now let's move on. A row intensified today over chants by Glastonbury performers against the Israeli military, which were aired by broadcast partner the BBC. Police have launched a criminal investigation now into the gigs by the music duo Bob Vylan and Irish rappers Kneecap inside Gaza. Witnesses and doctors say at least 67 people were killed in the latest Israeli airstrikes and shootings at aid sites. Violence is showing few signs of easing, even as the White House makes a new push for a ceasefire. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi reports now from Jerusalem.
The talks about resuming ceasefire negotiations might as well be happening on another planet. In Gaza, the grim reality remains unchanged. It's been another day of relentless violence and a rising death toll. This was a beachfront cafe in Gaza City and was full of people when it was struck. It was one of the few remaining places with a reliable internet connection. At least 22 people were killed here, according to medical responders.
Forget red lines, we're past that. Nothing left to say. Look around. All I see is blood. Men, martyrs, limbs, unbelievable. People come here to rest, get some internet, take a break from what they see inside Gaza. They come westward to breathe.
Among the dead, Franz al-Salmi, who was a well-known artist, and Ismail Abu Khattab, a photojournalist. More than 50 people were also injured in the strike. These images, taken moments after the blast, show Palestinian journalist Bayan Abu Sultan. She's covered in blood and visibly dazed. Over the past 24 hours, Israeli airstrikes have intensified, some of the heaviest bombardments in weeks. They follow new evacuation orders in northern Gaza, triggering yet another wave of displacement. The horror in Gaza plays out in slow motion, each day bringing new funerals. Civilians, exhausted, starving and terrified, can only endure as international efforts to broker a ceasefire once again appear to be gathering pace. A framework for a 60-day truce tied to a staged hostage exchange already exists to end the fighting here. But fundamental disagreements persist. Hamas is demanding a permanent end to the war, while Israel insists it must retain the right to resume military operations when the truce expires. For civilians, though, trapped with nowhere to escape the bombs, a diplomatic breakthrough feels unbearably distant. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Jerusalem.
Well, let's just bring you some breaking news in connection with that. In fact, US officials are saying that Donald Trump plans to host the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu again at the White House next week, next Monday. We do know that Ron Dermer, Israel's Strategic Affairs Minister, said to be Netanyahu's right-hand man, is there at the moment. The question for the ceasefire, would it be a permanent one, as Hamas is demanding, or would it be over a shorter span than that, for example, 60 days, which has been suggested by the Netanyahu government? The problem with that, of course, is if the ceasefire did happen like that, it might collapse the government and bring back into play those allegations and court cases against Netanyahu himself. So, anyway, we'll see what happens. But the word is that Donald Trump plans to host the Israeli Prime Minister again next week at the White House. Well, coming up after the break, we will speak to one of the MPs pushing for some in Gaza to get a Ukraine-style visa to come to the UK.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Welcome back. Dozens of MPs and lords from across the political spectrum have called on the Prime Minister to urgently set up a Ukraine-style visa to allow Gazans with family in the UK to come here. Some of the letter reads, amidst this horror, many Palestinians with family members in the UK remain stranded without any safe or viable path to reunite with their loved ones in the UK. We call on the UK government to urgently establish a Gaza family scheme to enable Palestinians in Gaza to reunite with their loved ones in the UK until it is safe to return. Just as the UK opened its doors to those fleeing persecution in Ukraine and Hong Kong, we believe that the same generosity should be extended to Palestinian families. Well, one of the signatories to that letter is the Labour MP for York Central, Rachel Maskell, who joins me now. Welcome to you. Do you know how many people this would actually involve?
I don't know, but what I do know is that it's an absolutely devastating situation when you are a Palestinian residing here in the UK and you have got close family members every single day, and every moment of that day, you're really worried for their safety, and therefore reuniting families is a human and kind thing to do, but it is the right thing to do as well.
I only ask because the mood in the UK, as I'm sure you're very aware, after a couple of years of mammoth legal immigration figures, is enough is enough, however sympathetic they are feeling to the plight of those living in Gaza.
I don't believe we're talking about many people. If I take my constituent invited to the UK on a study programme at York St John University, he came over just before the atrocities commenced on the 7th of October and has been trapped here apart from his family. So the UK government asked him to come, and when he comes, he now can't reunite with his family. It's those rare situations which we're really asking the government to make some movement on, to bring his family to the UK. He's got two little children, aged 10 and 6 years old, and they want to be with their father. They want a place of safety, but instead, every day he's hearing stories, and often a house just down the road has been blown apart, and indeed the windows put through just where his children were sleeping. That's what the stress is that he's having to live. And what we need to do is be able to help these people across the border and then to come to the UK. And the irony is his family are eligible to come to the UK, but the Home Office has been saying they've got to get their biometrics first, and they can't get over the border to get their biometrics, so they're stuck.
Well, indeed, what are the practicalities of getting people out? How would they exit? You know, who would you choose and why? How close a relative would they have to be? Where would you draw that line?
Well, I think we are talking about close family members, and of course, they would need to be listed by the UK government to be able to cross the border. So that's the first hurdle, and we can't even get through that. And after that, they will then be in a neighbouring country being able to get in and get the biometrics before coming to the UK. So there'll still be a process. But the problem is at the moment you can't even commence that process because the government aren't playing ball. And that's all I'm asking, is that the government enable that process to take place.
Have you had any form of conversation with government about this? Do you see any window that this might happen?
I've raised it consistently for 2 years with governments, or since the situation began. And I have to say, I'm no further forward than I was at the beginning. Often I heard ministers saying we can't have terrorists in the country. These were children at the time, aged just 9 and 5. These children just want to be with their daddy. And it's really cruel keeping this family apart.
Well, are you, or do you think there would be concern about radicalisation? You mentioned, we can't have terrorists in the country. Many people would feel that Gazans, given what they've been through, the multiple times they've moved and been bombed, would be extremely angry towards nations that allowed Israel to take a response after October the 7th.
These people are hurting, and these are little children that just want a family life. That's all we're talking about, and why deny this family that right? And therefore, I think it's really important to look at how we can bring families back together again, ensure that safety and peace, and show that we are a country that really does care for upholding human rights, but also upholding the right to a family life. So I think we've got a responsibility to these families to help them come together to a place of safety, not least when we have asked those individuals to come to the UK to ensure that they can now bring their families. So I really do urge government to really think again through its policy to make it practical and workable, because at the moment their policy is just not executable. You cannot make it work.
Rachel Maskell, Labour MP, thank you. Well, this is The World with me, Anna Botting. Next up, the jury begins deliberations as music mogul Sean Diddy Combs awaits his fate in the sex trafficking trial.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Jurors have started deliberating in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs on charges that could put the hip-hop mogul behind bars for the rest of his life. Well, here then is a reminder of what he is accused of and key moments in the trial. Well, the 55-year-old faces 2 counts of sex trafficking, carrying 15 years in prison if convicted. There are also 2 counts relating to alleged arrangements to fly sex workers across state lines, and the racketeering conspiracy charge could mean life in jail. On the 14th of May, the court was shown security camera footage of Diddy appearing to beat his then-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, in a hotel. She testified against him. Just over a month later, jurors were shown video of so-called freak-offs that had been mentioned in testimonies. Those were said to involve Combs, Ventura and sex workers. Diddy's defence rested their case on the 24th of June in just 25 minutes. In closing arguments, they ridiculed the prosecution's case against their client. He has pleaded not guilty to all charges. Well, let's bring in our US correspondent, Martha Kellner, who's at the courthouse in New York. And so here we are then, after weeks of testimony, the key week for Sean Combs.
Yeah, it really is, Anna. The stakes could not be higher for Sean Diddy Combs. His family have been inside this courthouse for much of the past 7 weeks of the trial, and today was no different. 6 of his 7 children and his mother sitting on the front row of the public gallery. And as the judge sent out the jury to begin their deliberations, the family remained. They stood up, they held hands, and together they said a prayer. After they'd finished that prayer, they all clapped. The family then left the courtroom, and Sean Combs was almost alone inside that room, hunched over a laptop, and it was hard not to contemplate just how much this man's life has changed over the past 10 months. He once considered himself the king of this city. He grew up not 10 miles from here in Harlem, relatively humble beginnings. He rose to become arguably the most powerful figure in worldwide hip-hop and R&B music. Well, now he's on the brink of finding out his fate. This jury will decide whether he's guilty of the very serious crimes of which he's accused. If he is convicted of the most serious charges against him, he faces the very real possibility of life in prison. The judge, Arun Subramaniam, gave lengthy instructions to this jury as they began their deliberations, a jury of 8 men and 4 women. He thanked them for their service, and they've had to sit through some pretty harrowing testimony. Much of the prosecution case has focused on these so-called freak-offs. That's the name that Sean Combs gave to the sex marathons in which it's alleged that he forced his partners, his girlfriend of more than a decade, Cassie Ventura, and another woman who testified under the pseudonym Jane, that he forced them allegedly to partake in sex with male escorts, sex sessions that would last sometimes days on end. So demanding were they on their participants that they had to have IV drips afterwards to recover from the dehydration. So harrowing testimony which both his family and this jury have sat through. It may seem like a relatively straightforward case, this, but it's actually very complex. The charges which this jury is considering are very complicated indeed. The most serious charge of which he is accused is racketeering. This is something more commonly associated with multi-member crime organisations like the mafia. But the prosecutors in this case argue that Sean Combs did preside over a criminal empire, that he ordered his employees a network of bodyguards and assistants and so on to cover up these alleged crimes. If he's convicted of that racketeering charge, that faces a maximum sentence of life in prison. He's also accused of sex trafficking, of forcing these women to engage in those sex marathons via threats, blackmail and the threat of violence as well. The lowest hanging fruit for the prosecution perhaps is the transportation for prostitution charge. The jury have to decide whether he organised for these male escorts to be transported over state lines for the purposes of sex. As you mentioned, Anna, the defence case lasted only 25 minutes. They laughed off the claims made by the prosecution. They said that these women were only interested in financial gain. The jury now deciding which side they believe.
Martha, I know will keep us abreast of any developments. Martha Kellner, live there for us at the court in New York. Well, this is The World with me, Anna Botting. Next up, wildfires erupt across Italy, France and Turkey as Europe swelters in a summer heatwave. But what's behind the intensity?
In February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Thousands of Russians were drafted. For some, the reality of frontline warfare meant one thing: desertion.
I had a rush of adrenaline. It was a kind of treason.
But they did not escape on their own.
I help people to desert Russian army.
The stakes are high, but for some, there's no other option.
We keep going till Putin's regime is over.
Escaping Putin on Sky News.
I'm Cordelia Lynch, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Bangkok.
These slums, once gripped by fear and death.
There is far less bloodshed now, but it hasn't gone away.
Who's asking you to kill?
The police will give me the orders, and after I kill the target, I throw the gun away.
We try our best to uncover and unpick a fast-changing and deeply complex region.
Sheikh Hasina, how confident are you that she will stand trial?
She will stand trial, there's no doubt about that.
Tel Aviv's skyline and the familiar sounds of an Iranian salvo. This caught some off guard. It's perhaps part of a broader psychological strategy by Iran to make Israel look exposed.
This is the source of Hezbollah's fury, the aftermath of an assassination.
What happens here has the potential to reshape the Middle East. Just seen Imran Khan leave, and as we understand it, he's just been shot in the leg.
They have decided that the only way they'll allow elections is if I'm inside jail or killed.
Sky News get the full story first.
Chinese vessels start encircling the boat we're on, blocking its path.
The Chinese are now deploying water cannons, firing it directly towards our boat. We've discovered doctors across Delhi dishing out pills like this, claiming they will provide a lifelong cure for homosexuality.
Rohingya people fleeing an escalating civil war.
The situation here in Cox's is desperate. An already insecure place does feel a lot more precarious.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of the screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back. Now, it is summer, but almost anyone in the UK and Europe will tell you this heat feels particularly ferocious, especially if you are in southern Europe. Parts of Spain have seen 46 degrees Celsius today, while there have been wildfires in Turkey, Italy and France. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore explains what's going on.
As Britain baked, the wise and the fortunate sought refuge on beaches,
and in Lidos, anywhere to take the edge off the unusually high June temperatures. At Wimbledon, it was the hottest opening day on record, and tennis fans came prepared.
Everybody should drink a lot of water and enjoy the sun whilst it's here.
Just got some visor, got a bag of ice in here.
I've got a bag literally full of ice packs.
Water. I think water is going to save me. Yeah, and umbrellas too.
June is supposed to be pleasantly balmy, but this is the second scorcher of the summer already. So what's going on? Well, it has a lot to do with a jet stream, normally sweeping high-altitude winds eastwards across the UK. Right now, it has formed a huge wave from south to north. That has sucked hot air up from North Africa to the continent, and it is going nowhere fast, almost locked in place beneath what is called a heat dome. High air pressure has formed a lid over the continent. It squeezes down on the air closer to the surface, increasing temperatures and stops it escaping. It is like a pressure cooker. And look at the impact on temperatures. For the deep, dark reds on this scale, it's around 10 to 12 degrees hotter than normal. The southeast of the UK catches the edge, but the heat dome sits over the continent for days to come, only slowly moving east. Climate change is making heat waves in June much more likely. Before the industrial age, the southeast of England could have expected 3 consecutive days above 28 degrees once every 50 years. According to the World Weather Attribution Service, it is now 1 in every 5 years. So a heat wave in the coolest month of the summer is now 10 times more likely, and there could be more to come.
The likelihood of seeing heat waves again during the summer period, I think, is quite likely. Combine that with the marine heat wave that we've got, so that extra energy and heat that we're getting from the oceans around the UK. But also, if we don't see much rain, if that ground remains quite dry and parched, then again, the energy from the sun really just goes into increasing the temperatures rather than evaporating any moisture.
Mediterranean plants are thriving as the climate changes and heat becomes a new normal, according to the Royal Horticultural Society. It's just not summer as we used to know it. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Well, let's bring in Richard Allen, Professor in Climate Science at the University of Reading for us now. We've heard a lot about heat domes in the last few years, haven't we? On the west coast of America, over parts of Canada as well. Now it seems Europe. How long is it going to linger and how damaging are they?
Well, I mean, this heat dome has sat over Europe for a little while. It's just giving a glancing blow to the UK. So our heat wave, our second one that we're having now, will be quite brief. But as your correspondent said, and as Liz Bentley from the Royal Met Soc in your piece said, we can expect more later in the year, probably. And these heat domes, they're not new occurrences. Weather produced these events. But as your correspondent says, I mean, the warming climate due to our emissions of greenhouse gases is making them more potent.
Well, here in the UK, we need to remember we have seen 2 years of what felt like constant rain. Not so for parts of Europe, where it has been boiling, some record-breaking temperatures. What is the prognosis for European temperatures going forward?
Well, the heat is kind of shifting towards the east, like you saw in that piece just now. And, you know, it will linger to a certain extent. But we've also seen heat in the United States, North America recently. And it's all part of this connected upper level wind called the jet stream. So these waves that get stuck in a rut almost. And when you get atmospheric pressure, high atmospheric pressure over one region, it stifles the formation of cloud and rainfall, and it ends up baking the ground. But at the same time, you have other regions like, you know, in the south of Asia at the moment, there's been intense rain, you know, serious flooding going on. So it's all part of a connected system. And both of these extremes are getting worse as the climate warms, because you're getting stronger heat waves, we're getting more intense droughts, but we're also getting heavier rainfall and associated flooding when that happens.
Well, I did read one book, an American book, to be fair, which said that in the future you would have to live north of the 42nd parallel, which is just north of Rome. Some might say that is alarmist, but is that the sort of, you know, places we're beginning to talk about in the decades to come?
Well, we're certainly seeing the fact that the warmth is almost pushing towards the pole. But what we can say is that these extremes will continue to worsen as we continue to emit greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. the only way of limiting these increasingly intense extremes is to rapidly and massively cut greenhouse gases. But inevitably, we're also going to have to adapt to the more dangerous climate. So be more careful, more care for vulnerable people in heat waves, but also our infrastructure needs to be designed to better cope with these more extreme weather conditions.
Richard Allen, appreciate your time there. Thank you. Well, that is the programme for tonight. Do stay with Sky News if you can. I'll be back in a few moments' time with Sky News at 10.